interested in coming to learn about developer ecosystems, come join us over here. Otherwise, hang out more silently. All right. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to the DAOs. My name is Juliette Chevalier, and I'm developer advocate for Aragon. And today I will be speaking about how to build developer ecosystems for DAOs. Now, I think the most interesting thing about the how is that in order to really assess how to do it, we kind of have to take a few steps back and grasp the why, the what, and the who. So let's start with the why. Of course, the why is the source of everything we do. And when we look at particularly projects in crypto, the developer products fuel the end user growth. And this is true across, we've seen this across the market, right? Whenever there's a big spike in the crypto market and the bull run in general, we're also seeing a spike in developer activity. Now, what I call this the developer end user relationship. This is something that is happening on the foundational level. It's constantly going on, even though nor the developer nor the end user are constantly speaking with each other, right? And so it starts at this stage. We have developers who are building products. They're building products either on top of other protocols or they're building their own projects. And as they're building, these products are always enhancing the ecosystem's offering and the protocol's offering. Now, because the products become better, then we have more users interacting with those protocols, which eventually comes back into developers wanting to build more products on top of the projects. And so I'll give you one example. At our specific case, Aragon is a DAO framework. And so what that means is that we're building on-chain organizations. Now, these on-chain organizations are able to do a variety of things. They may help manage the organization's community. They may help with collective decision-making. They're managing a DAO's assets. And ultimately, they're executing actions on-chain. But the way we've set up our framework is in a way where really the framework enables you to create the on-chain organizations, but everything else that you're trying to do is done through plugins. Now, we've set that up because we know that each organization is a group of people. People are constantly changing, they're evolving. Each organization is based on different purposes and for a different reason. And so what that means is that we needed to embed within immutable blockchains a way for these organizations to mutate through time. And we do that through two different ways. One is through plugins. You can create and enhance whatever functionality organizations can do. And then the other way is through UIs, right? You may have a Japanese DAO that may want to have their information in another language with another tone based for another audience and context. And so through these two ways, we enable each organization to be different. Now, what that means then for a developer and end user relationship is that we have developers who are building plugins or UIs on top of our protocol. Then these plugins and UIs enhance the experience for the DAO builder, so more DAO builders come so that developers want to build more products. And we're always looking at this graph in some way or another when we're looking at developer ecosystems. So our why is essentially the fact that the more optionality these organizations have, the more DAOs will be built because there's more space for them to generate whatever purpose they're trying to initiate. Now let's turn that into the what. Right? If the why was this user need, how do we turn that then into a developer CTA so that it grows in the funnel? And there's a key distinction here that I'd like to make. I see this across developer portals and across documentation, so not only Web3, but really in the industry in general, where oftentimes when we're looking at targeting a developer audience, we start with the why, right? What do we want the developers to build? Where do developers provide most value for our projects? But really, it should start with the why. Right? Why does our product matter? And what functionality does that product provide that will motivate the developer to go into the what? So to provide a bit of an example, I just went through the why of what we're building, kind of those functionalities, but the what, the developer CTA, is not creating organizations that do collective decision makings that execute on-chain actions, is building plugins and dApps. But we want them to do this because of that. And so that shifts the mindset and the narrative and how we're structuring our communications out to the community. And who is that community? Let's untangle a bit that developer persona. When we're looking at a developer persona, there's a bunch of different persona canvases that we can play with. But I think these are some key patterns in the funnel that I've seen across industries. So firstly, assess what is attracting them. What metrics are they using to evaluate their tools? How aware are they of our offering, and why do they care? Secondly, what types of developers are we attracting? How much influence do they have in the business? How much influence do they have in their developer community? Do they scope? Do they have access to actual purchase tools? Thirdly, who are they? What's their background? What's their demographic? What do they like? What do they not like? What are the job titles, their aspirations, goals? That'll help us really frame the language that we're using towards speaking to them. And then lastly, what are their skills and their programming languages? What kind of platforms, SDKs, APIs are they used to interacting with? What kind of patterns are they most used to seeing that'll really help shape how we're thinking about our own developer experience? Now, there's a few ways to get to these answers. Certainly a big one is just quantitative data. There's some research out there from Electric Capital, A16Z Crypto, Alchemy. These organizations are constantly putting out information about developer activity, and there's a lot there that we can use to kind of read the landscape. But that doesn't get us to like the individual, right? The individual for our specific use case. And that's when we go into the qualitative research. I'm taking this snapshot from a research study that we did specifically, where we really tried to assess who was our developer persona. How do they come into crypto? Why are they here? How's their journey, their inspiration, their goals? If they weren't building a DAO, what were they doing instead and why? What are some pain points, their big needs? What tooling are they already using? And through that, we can kind of come into some conclusions about who our developer persona is. In this specific case, we realized, for example, that what was attracting developers to build in Aragon was mostly our high brand awareness, because we had a long time in the ecosystem and we had never been hacked. So stability and security were key, and they were trying to build with us so they can bootstrap their own network effect. Then, these are developers who are mid-level, experienced. They had a high, often business influence, but potentially a low developer community engagement, which was an interesting find for us to have. They're from Europe, India, Japan, United States, mostly male, but I'm trying to fix that. So, women engineers, hit me up. 18, 30 years old, and mostly freelancers or service providers, mostly Solidity enthusiasts, strong Web2 background, some things like this. Now that we have the who, we can go and dive deep into the how, which is the juicy portion of the talk. So when we're really looking at how to build this, I usually think of 3 key implementation tracks. At the core, the nucleus of it all, we have the developer experience. The developer experience is the tooling, it is the documentation, it is the gathering the feedback and passing it over to our engineering teams. So usually when we're thinking of where the developer relations professional lives, if you have a team that's focused on developer experience, they'll usually be living within engineering teams. Then we have developer advocacy, right? Once the developer experience is strong enough, we can go out and actually create these advocacy output. This is the content, the tutorials, the videos, the educational resources. This is really the output that developers are using to learn and build across your product. And lastly, we have developer relations. This is something that is constantly happening either on the back or at the forefront of the organization, depending on the stage. But this is really the relationships and the one-on-one interactions that we're having with the developer community. This is the outreach, the support that we're giving people as they're building on our stack, the events that we're attending, and the emphasis that we're placing on those developer-to-developer relationships. Now, these implementation tracks are happening all throughout this journey, right? So we have, at the beginning, of the developers just being aware that our tool exists. This is something that became super clear to us within the research, and doing some introspection, it became a reality for me as well. So I thought more about it, which is that developers often will find the tooling based on the questions that they're needing and the problems that they're having, right? Yes, we can do a lot of social media output and marketing, but and that'll create some awareness, but it'll be general. That won't lead you into actually learning and building and kind of evaluating the tool, because at that point in time, you may not need that tool. And so having a good SEO so that you're top of the funnel when it comes to being the answer to the problems that developers are having is key. Then we have some evaluation. This is when you're asking your community, you're going into the docs, you're spending time just assessing whether this tool is actually right for your needs, so that it drives and then the motivation into learning. When you're diving in learning, there's some tutorials, the videos, the talks. This is where the developer advocacy output shines. And often people will mix the learning with the building, but I personally like to keep them separate, because I think the learning is the developer advocacy portion, and then the building is the developer experience, right? Which developer experience tools are they using? How is the support? How does the community support them in that building? How clear is the documentation and easy to find when they're actually pursuing the action? And then scaling. Great, you build a prototype, that's fun, amazing, you got to evaluate the tool. How do we take you to that next level? What type of support are we providing so that your project scales? And then retaining in the community, right? Making sure that you're a super user, that you're sharing the voice and kind of funneling back all the way to awareness with your reach. And so when we look at that journey, we'll see a few different projects brought out across the different tracks. In developer experience, we're seeing first and foremost, making sure that the documentation is updated, it's clear, the developer portal has a nice design, it's well maintained. There's some examples and use cases who can drive that why closer to home. Then spending some time, certainly in the developer experience tooling. This is a CLI, an SDK, whatever type of tooling you're providing to ensure that they're going all the way through the journey. And then how are you using both of those tools to provide some discovery? How is that my research? How am I understanding the pain points that they're seeing across the funnel and turning them into experiences and solutions that will make the developer experience better? Now, I think the key thing with this graph is that these bubbles change sizes continuously, right? It'll depend on the product stage, on the organization's hierarchy, structure, maturity, on the budget, right? On the resources that they have. And so looking at this graph, you should expect it to shrink and increase in size based on your specific organization and the type of things that you're looking for. Now, to provide you an example, this is our current developer journey. We want developers building a plugin, publishing a plugin into our protocol, installing that plugin into a DAO, and then using that DAO plugin throughout. Now, when I'm looking at this journey, I'm thinking, the awareness, where does it fall? What kind of experiences do they have across the journey? How can we retain them? Where are some of the pain points? What are the learning tutorials assessed through each of those steps? And through that, we can kind of decouple a better strategy that ensures that retention follows through. Secondly, we have developer advocacy. Advocacy, I think, is what people usually think of when they're thinking of DevRel or growing developer ecosystems in general. This is talks, tutorials, documentation, events. And in this portion, I think it always comes back to developer marketing. Developer marketing, especially for those with a traditional marketing background, we tend to think like, oh, it's social media, it's posting out ads, it's all of the traditional marketing tactics that are provided for the end user. But in reality, developers can smell that. It's like, it doesn't even matter how good and sexy your information, your marketing is. The only thing that will actually make them cross the point is if your information is educational, easy to understand, inspiring, and engaging. So that's really the best developer marketing. Now, even having that said, they're getting that information from somewhere, right? Where are the developers coming from? Is it mostly social media? Is it a newsletter? Is it the blog post that we're doing? And this is really for you to track and assess. From what we found, developers are mostly coming in from our events and our SEO, because like I said earlier, when you're top of the funnel in the answers to the problems that they're having, they're way more likely to use your tooling. And then we get to developer relations. I love this little GIF, like throwing just a cold water bucket in your face, because really, when it comes to developer relations, the biggest learning is that it's not scalable. Now, it's not scalable because the resilience, the strength, the power of a developer community rests on the strength of the one-on-one relationships within that community. And so, of course, if we're trying to scale one-on-one relationships, that becomes increasingly hard. And that's what I always try to think of when we're looking at this portion of the tracks, is how do I make the work that doesn't scale a little bit more? So we're usually looking at this graph, right? I think from an entry point, we have events. Events is something like we're doing here. We're chatting. We're having great conversations. But ultimately, I can only speak to the amount of chairs that we have in here. And so what that means is that we want to be doing a bit more projects, and we'll see how we can scale this in a second. Now, these events will ultimately also be hackathons. Hackathons are great because they provide a lot of products into our stack, but they also will need support. And support is a great entry point, another great entry point into our community, right? These are when people are interacting with our engineers, they're interacting with our support team, they're gathering a sense from the developers that are also building within that community. And so it's really funneling the community so the community can have more one-on-one relationships. So how do we scale support? Support is often one-on-one. A developer is asking me a question and I'm providing some support back. This doesn't scale. And so I actually took this little hack from Patrick Collins, from ex-Chainlink developer advocate, currently founding Cyphren, which is that every question that we get, we can post in a public forum and make it X times more scalable. So if I'm getting a question that I'm seeing recurrently, I'll just go ahead and post it in Stack Overflow, Stack Exchange, our own public forum, wherever that medium is for you. And you can already start making that support scalable and upgradability. Secondly, we have events. Like I said, events like this only have X amount of shares. So what do? We record them, we turn them into Twitter threads, we turn them into articles. We try to scale the experience that we're having here. And then lastly, the one-on-one relationships. These are certainly the hardest ones, but there's a lot of power in turning those relationships to public spaces. Again, the power relies in the one-on-one relationships within that community. So it's not only me and another developer speaking, but it's really developer-to-developer relationships that we want to be encouraging, and that can only happen when those relationships are moved from DMs into the public space. So some do's and don'ts that I've seen across the board. I think, especially if you're an organization with funds, people will tend to just try to buy out the community. You want to pull in funds in the ecosystem and think that that'll magically work itself out. That's not true. Yes, they'll take in your money, but they'll probably leave and go somewhere else as soon as that money runs out. And so even though that's true, we do also want to distribute our native tokens to the right builders and communities. And this is specifically important for DAOs. So how do we do that? There's a variety of different ways. Importantly, through hackathons or bounties, you can kind of direct a bit more the types of projects that are being built within your community. Also through promoting and motivating the right actions that you want to be seeing. So if you have a developer that is constantly helping out others in your Discord, or a developer that is going the extra mile and writing documentations and tutorials, those kinds of actions should be rewarded. And that's a great way to bring the right builders into your community. Secondly, the community, we often try to get, particularly when it comes to hackathons and bounties, we end up wanting to get developers to build the things that we have on our roadmap or that we want to be seeing up next in our product. I think this is a mistake, mostly because two reasons. One of them is on our end, we all, as a team, we already have the best practices, the security implications. We're taking all of the risk with getting a third-party developer code into our code base. So it could be a bit tricky to merge that in, to make sure that it follows the standards that we've already set for ourselves. And then secondly, honestly, for the engineer, they're creative, autonomous people. They don't want to be told so strictly what to do next. You want to be encouraging some exploration, some usage of your tooling to fit their own needs so that it actually excites them and keeps them coming back. And so that's where encouraging more use cases for your products is a way better turn to get them to build, but at the same time, not be so deterministic in what they should be building. Then grants programs. Grants programs often distribute funds, which is great. Again, these are freelancer developers who often don't have a stable income to start building on your project. So it's a great way to streamline the evaluation and the building effect. But if they don't have a strong follow-up strategy to scale the projects, it's essentially useless. And so these are important things to keep in mind as we're looking at DAOs as the organizational structure for these developer ecosystems. And when should all these be applied? Well, sadly, it depends. I think the key factors to be looking at is, firstly, the stage of your product. Is it an idea? Is it on testnet? Is it on mainnet? Is it absolutely mature and has reached PMF? All of these stages will require different output from your team. How mature is the organization? How much financial resources do you have? How much team bandwidth do you have? Do you have a large team, a small team? How much effort are you putting into getting this done? These are all important variables. And then, of course, just the overarching state of the market, the data that you're tracking, kind of the growth that you're seeing across. So let's speak a bit about that last data and metrics portion, which can often be a bit scarier. In this stage, I always like to think about metrics as a bit of like the DevRel paradox. DevRel is a highly technical field, but in many ways, its success is dependent upon the personal stage. And so it comes to a point where it can be very hard to track metrics throughout time consistently. And so what we want to be looking at is a bit of like a qualitative as well as a quantitative state. We have number one, a North Star metric of what we're trying to accomplish, that developer CTA that we were speaking about before. And we can map it out across two axes. First, qualitative. How are the developer-to-developer relationships within my community? How is the brand awareness? How's the sentiment? That je ne sais quoi that you can kind of sense as you're speaking to people. And then there's, of course, the more quantitative stuff, right? The Discord metrics, how is the community engagement, the GitHub stars, how much are they using your code, the SDK downloads. And both of these carry equal weight, even though one of them is way more hard than the other. So we can see some examples, right? These are some stats that we're getting from Dune, that we're getting from Google Studio, that we're getting from NPM Stats, just trying to assess those harder metrics. Also tracking the developer portal. I think this is key so that you're really assessing where developers are bouncing off, where they're spending more or less time. And so this is really useful to know where to guide that next output. And then, of course, sharing a bit of that developer ecosystem. This really provides some inspiration. It gives you a sense of where things are headed and why. And it can provide more visibility also for the projects themselves. So, TLDR, how to do it. Number one, strategy based on the parameters that we discussed earlier. Organization stage, North Star metric, product. Secondly, you want to be doing things that don't scale, but do the scalable upgrades. That's super important. Then you want to scope work highly strictly. As you've seen, there's a lot of stuff that this can encompass. And so you want to be scoping it right based on the stage of where you're at and not just overload yourself with work. You want to be following the data that you're tracking, those qualitative, that intuition, that sense. Usually dev roles are highly empathetic, so it's important to kind of be having that sentiment constantly. And then lastly, but most importantly, you want to lead the developer experience, really lead the way for then advocacy and relations. If developer experience is not strong, everything else will crumble. Doesn't matter how sexy the tutorials are or how friendly you are at a conference. Thank you. Questions, comments, ideas? Yes.
So you're talking about your plugin mechanism to get people to build them and use them. How many plugins do you have installed?
So it depends across chains. We have, I think on Mumbai, we have around 100. And then we have different, I think on Scorely, we have around 70. And then on Mainnet and Mumbai, I think Mumbai is around like 10 or 15. And then Mainnet, way less. I think maybe like 5.
Hey, great stuff. Curious, you mentioned how developers are incentivized to develop plugins around bootstrapping their own network effects. I'm curious if you could expand on that a little bit, and if they are rewarded kind of proportional to the amount that their plugins are used, how you track the ongoing usage of their plugins and how they're rewarded back for that.
Love that question, David. A few points. So firstly, on the bootstrap part, whenever you're publishing a plugin into the protocol, automatically any DAO within the ecosystem can use that plugin. So it makes sense, right? If you're building a plugin, you just build one smart contract and automatically you have access to every Aragon DAO out there as your potential market. And that's what I meant by like being able to like build one thing and just bootstrap the network effect across the journey. When it comes to your second question of how to reward these plugin builders, that's something we're dabbling head on. If you have ideas, let's chat later. But currently, plugins are free for developers to publish. They're free for DAOs to install. We do think there's a benefit there on both sides, especially in the terms of security. It's something that we're exploring and haven't kind of like made a decision on it yet, but up and coming. Yeah.
If anyone could publish a plugin, what are the security procedures you have to go through to publish it? And if you don't have any capabilities, either unintentionally or intentionally?
So currently, anyone can publish it. It could be a malicious plugin, and you could publish it. That's true. It's a trustless, permissionless system. Now, having that said, what security measures are we taking? So there's some plugins that we have built our own. Every plugin that we have built has been audited already 2-3 times. So on that regard, you should feel quite safe. And then when it comes to third-party developers, we're setting up some plans for sponsoring some audits, from working with them to ensure the best practices. But ultimately, the state of where we're at is that the plugins get published, but currently the application layer does not support any plugin that we haven't built ourselves. So we're currently building up the modularity framework so that that becomes a reality and people can do it. And at that stage, we'll be playing with really providing some identification factors. This will be based on the UI, and what we can do there is be a bit more exclusive, where like on the application layer, it's entirely open. You can publish whatever you want. And then on the application layer, we're passing in additional filters and kind of structuring in a way so that ideally you're not installing a malicious plugin. Cool. Thanks, guys.